She walked into that warehouse with a badge, a dog, and 11 years of iron nerves. She had seen bodies. She had seen betrayal. She had even buried a partner once. But nothing, not one single moment in her entire career, prepared her for the dying soldier on that floor who whispered a name that would destroy her world completely. This is the story they tried to bury. And tonight it finally gets told. If you love your mom and dad, hit that subscribe button right now and show them some love. This one is for every family that deserved the truth. Special Agent Dana Reyes did not become one of the FBI's most decorated field agents by accident. She earned it. She earned it through 11 years of sleepless nights, through undercover operations that pushed her to the edge of her identity, through losing people she loved on the job and still showing up the next morning with her badge clipped to her belt, and her German Shepherd Rex walking beside her like the only partner she could fully trust. Dana was 39 years old, sharp as a blade, and twice as dangerous. She had a reputation inside the bureau that most men twice her rank never achieved. She did not flinch. She did not break. She did not ask permission when she knew she was right. That combination made her both deeply respected and quietly feared by the people she worked with. But it also made her the kind of agent that got called when a situation did not fit neatly into any category. When something smelled wrong and no one could explain why, Dana was the one who got the call. The call came on a Thursday night in late October. The sky over Northern Virginia was heavy with low clouds, and the kind of cold that gets into your bones before you even step outside. Dana had been at her desk finishing a case report when her phone buzzed with a message from her supervisor, Deputy Director Harold Vance. The message was short. 3 words. Warehouse. Route 7. Now. No case number. No briefing document. No partner assigned. Just those 3 words and a pin drop on her Maps application. Dana looked at Rex, who was curled on his mat in the corner of her office. He lifted his head and looked back at her with those steady amber eyes that always seemed to understand more than they should. She grabbed her jacket and her gear bag, and they were in the truck in under 4 minutes. The drive to the warehouse took 22 minutes. Dana used every one of them running through the possibilities in her head. An abandoned industrial zone off Route 7 was not a location she associated with active federal cases. There were no known cartel operations in that corridor. No recent intelligence flags. No chatter. Whatever Vance had sent her to find, it had not come through normal channels. That alone was enough to make her drive with one hand resting near her sidearm. She pulled up to the building without headlights for the last quarter mile, a habit she had developed years ago that had saved her life more than once. The warehouse was a massive structure of corrugated steel and broken concrete, 3 stories high with most of the exterior lighting long since dead. A single side door was slightly ajar. Dana killed the engine and sat for a moment. Rex was already on his feet in the back seat, nose working the air through the cracked window, and he made a sound she had only heard him make twice before. Not a growl. Not a bark. A low, soft whimper. Like grief. Dana got out quietly, clipped Rex's lead and moved toward the door. She pushed it open with her shoulder, weapon drawn, and swept the entry point before stepping inside. The interior of the warehouse was cavernous and dark except for a pale shaft of blue-white light from a gap in the roof where the steel panels had separated. Broken machinery lined the walls. Pigeons shifted somewhere in the upper rafters. The floor was concrete, cracked and stained, covered in years of dust and debris. Dana moved slowly, letting her eyes adjust, letting Rex guide her. He pulled left toward the far wall and she followed without hesitation because she had learned long ago that his instincts outpaced hers every single time. She saw the boots first, then the legs, then the full shape of a man slumped against the base of the far wall beneath a shattered window, his back against the concrete, his head tilted slightly to one side. Dana moved to him in a controlled run, dropping to her knees when she reached him, and what she saw made her breath catch in her throat despite every year of training telling her to stay steady. He was alive. Barely. He was a large man, powerfully built even in the state he was in, wearing the remains of a military tactical uniform that had been stripped of insignia but still carried the unmistakable cut and construction of a Navy SEAL combat kit. The dark fabric was torn across the chest and left side, saturated with blood that had gone from bright red to deep burgundy as it dried and pooled. His face was angular and strong, late 40s, weathered from years of sun and wind and hard living. His hair was dark and cropped short, and his eyes, when they opened at the sound of her approach, were a pale blue-gray that caught the faint light from the roof and seemed almost luminescent in the darkness. Dana pressed both hands against the worst of the wounds on his chest and leaned over him. She told him her name. She told him she was FBI, and that she was going to get him help. She reached for her phone with one hand while keeping pressure on the wound with the other. He moved faster than she thought a man in his condition possibly could. His hand closed around her wrist with a grip that was still remarkably strong, and he shook his head once, just once, with an urgency that stopped her cold. "Do not call it in," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper, but it was controlled, deliberate, the voice of a man who had trained his whole life to function under maximum duress. "Do not use that phone. Not yet. Listen to me first. Please." Dana looked at him for one long second. Rex had pressed himself against the man's side, which he had never done with a stranger before in his entire life. Dana put the phone face down on the floor and leaned closer. The man swallowed hard and began to talk. His name was Marcus Cole. He was 46 years old. He had served as a Navy SEAL for 19 years before being recruited into a classified joint operations unit that officially did not exist on any government record. The unit operated under a program called Reyes Protocol, tasked with deep cover intelligence gathering in hostile territories that conventional military and intelligence channels could not penetrate. Marcus had been part of 3 major operations under Reyes Protocol over a period of 4 years. All 3 had been compromised. Personnel had been killed. Assets had been burned. And Marcus had spent the last 2 years of his life quietly and methodically gathering evidence that the compromises were not accidental. They were deliberate. Someone with the highest level of clearance inside the American intelligence structure had been feeding operational details to a network of foreign contractors operating across Eastern Europe and the Middle East. People had died because of those leaks. Good people. His people. Dana listened without interrupting. Her hands never left his chest. Rex never moved from his side. Marcus told her that he had spent those 2 years building a file. A physical file, not digital, because he had learned the hard way that anything digital could be found, altered, or erased. The file contained communications intercepts, financial transfer records, eyewitness depositions taken abroad, and 3 separate pieces of physical evidence that could not be explained away or discredited. He had carried it in the only place he believed was truly safe. He reached up with his free hand and gestured to the jacket folded beneath his right side. Dana carefully lifted the edge of it and felt along the lining. There. A thick ridge running along the interior hem. She worked the seam open with her fingers and extracted a sealed waterproof envelope, roughly the size of a paperback book. She set it on her knee and looked at him. She asked him who had done this. Who had compromised Reyes Protocol? Who had gotten his people killed? Marcus looked at her with those pale eyes for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Then he said the name. Harold Vance. The name hit Dana like a physical blow. Harold Vance. Her supervisor. The man who had sent her the 3-word text message that brought her to this exact location on this exact night. The man she had reported to for 6 years. The man she had trusted with her career and at times with her life. Deputy Director Harold Vance of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Dana sat back on her heels, and for the first time in a very long time she felt the specific cold of genuine fear. Not fear for herself. Fear for what the name meant. Fear for what it implied about how deep this went and who else might be involved, and whether she was sitting in this warehouse right now because Vance had sent her here to clean up a loose end named Marcus Cole. She looked at the envelope in her hand. She looked at the man bleeding against the wall in front of her. She looked at Rex, who was now facing the door they had entered through with his ears hard forward and his body absolutely still. Someone was coming. Dana had operated in the field long enough to know that the next 10 seconds would define everything that came after. She could call it in. She could alert the bureau, request medical, follow protocol, and hand the envelope to the chain of command. And if Vance had even one person in that chain, the evidence would be gone before sunrise and Marcus Cole would become a statistic in a file marked classified. Or she could run. She could take the man and the envelope and disappear into the night, and figure out her next move from a position that did not include being a sitting target in an abandoned warehouse. Rex growled. Headlights moved across the broken windows near the roof. Dana chose in 3 seconds. She pulled Marcus to his feet with a strength that surprised both of them, draped his arm across her shoulders, and told him to move. He moved. Whatever was keeping him alive was pure will, and the kind of physical conditioning that does not leave the body easily. They went out a different door than the one she had entered. A rusted freight door in the rear of the building that Dana had noted on her sweep and filed away the way she filed everything away, automatically and precisely. She got Marcus to her truck, got him into the back seat, got Rex in beside him and drove. She drove north for 40 minutes without using her phone or turning on the GPS. She used a route she had memorized years ago during a surveillance operation in the same county, back roads and unmarked turns that were not on any standard navigation map. She ended up at a property she knew belonged to a retired federal marshal named Tom Greer, a man who owed her a significant favor, and who she knew would not ask questions before he opened the door. Tom took one look at the situation and pointed her to a back bedroom and a first aid kit that was more surgical suite than medicine cabinet. He made coffee and disappeared into the front of the house without a single word. Dana worked on Marcus for 2 hours. She had field medical training that went well beyond standard bureau certification, and she used every bit of it. The wounds were serious, but the deepest one had missed anything vital by less than 2 centimeters. Marcus had been incredibly lucky or incredibly durable, or both. By the time Dana sat back and stripped off her gloves, his color was better and his breathing had steadied, and he was looking at her with an expression that mixed exhaustion and something that might have been gratitude. She opened the envelope. What she found inside was not just evidence. It was a blueprint. Marcus had been thorough in a way that went beyond thorough into something approaching obsessive, the kind of documentation that only a person who knows they are operating completely alone and may not survive to present it in person would compile. There were 47 pages of financial records showing transfers through a series of shell companies incorporated in Cyprus, Malta, and the Cayman Islands, all traceable through a chain of ownership that Marcus had mapped by hand in meticulous detail, terminating in a holding account controlled by a private security firm called Axis Meridian Group. There were 17 intercepted communications, printed on paper, with the metadata preserved in handwritten annotations in the margins, showing operational details of Wraith protocol missions being transmitted to Axis Meridian Group representatives between 48 and 72 hours before each mission launched. There were 3 signed depositions from foreign nationals who had witnessed meetings between Axis Meridian Group representatives, and a man matching Vance's physical description at locations in Prague, Nicosia, and Amman over a period of 3 years. And there was a photograph. A single photograph, printed on standard paper, slightly blurred as if taken from a distance with a long lens, but clear enough to be unmistakable. It showed Harold Vance seated across a table from a man Marcus had identified in an accompanying note as Dmitry Karev, a known Russian intelligence contractor who had been listed as deceased in a 2019 CIA briefing document. Dana sat with the photograph in her hand for a long time. Rex put his head in her lap. She let him. The question that sat in front of her now was not whether the evidence was real. She believed it was. The question was what to do with it in a landscape where she could no longer trust the institution she had given her adult life to. The FBI had a chain of command that ran directly through Harold Vance for anyone in her division. The Department of Justice had layers of political appointees, whose loyalties were impossible to map from where she was sitting. The CIA had its own internal politics, and a historical relationship with Wraith protocol operations that made them as likely to suppress the evidence as to act on it. She needed someone with authority, insulation from Vance's network, and a reason to move fast. She thought about it for 3 hours while Marcus slept and Tom Greer quietly restocked her first aid supplies without being asked. By the time the first gray light of dawn was beginning to show at the edges of the curtain, she had a name. Senator Patricia Holloway of the Senate Intelligence Committee. A woman Dana had met exactly once 3 years earlier, at a congressional briefing on domestic counterterrorism. A woman who had a reputation so clean it was almost suspicious, and who had been publicly and vocally at odds with the intelligence community's resistance to oversight for the better part of a decade. A woman who, if Dana's read of her was correct, would understand immediately what she was looking at and would have both the platform and the motivation to make sure it could not be buried. Getting to Holloway without alerting Vance was the problem. Dana's credentials, her vehicle, her phone, her credit cards, all of it was traceable. She was an FBI agent going dark on a case her supervisor had personally assigned her. The clock was already running. Vance would know by now that something had gone wrong at the warehouse. He would have people looking. And if he had enough of the bureau in his pocket to have run Wraith protocol leaks undetected for 4 years, he had enough to put a very quiet and very efficient search in motion for Dana Reyes. She woke Marcus just before 6 in the morning. She told him what she was planning. He listened with his eyes closed and then opened them and told her there was something else she needed to know. Something he had not told her the night before because he had not been sure he could trust her completely. She asked him what it was. He told her that Harold Vance had not acted alone. Wraith Protocol had a secondary oversight layer that most people in the program did not know about. A civilian advisory board of 4 individuals who had provided political cover and institutional legitimacy to the program since its inception. 3 of them had been kept in the dark about what Vance was doing, and were themselves potentially in danger once Vance realized the evidence existed. But the 4th member of that board had known. The 4th member had been Vance's original contact inside the American system, the person who had recruited Vance into the arrangement with Axis Meridian Group more than 5 years ago. Dana asked for the name. Marcus told her. She recognized it immediately. The name belonged to a woman who had served on 3 presidential transition teams, had been a senior advisor at the National Security Council, and who was currently the chief of staff to the Director of National Intelligence. A woman named Catherine Blair who was, by any conventional measure, one of the most powerful and least publicly visible figures in the entire American intelligence apparatus. The scope of what Dana was now holding pressed down on her with a weight that was almost physical. This was not a rogue agent and a foreign contractor. This was a coordinated, long-running operation embedded at the absolute highest levels of both the intelligence community and its civilian oversight structure. People who had the ability to make evidence disappear, to discredit witnesses, to end careers and, as Marcus Cole was lying in front of her demonstrating, to end lives. Dana folded the papers back into the envelope. She sealed it. She looked at Marcus and told him that she needed him to stay alive long enough to testify. He almost smiled. He told her that staying alive was something he had a reasonable amount of experience with. She told him that was good because she was going to need every bit of it. What followed over the next 9 days was the kind of operation that Dana had trained for without ever expecting to actually execute against her own institution. She moved Marcus 3 times using vehicles borrowed from Tom Greer, and 2 other individuals she trusted with a precision she never fully explained to either of them. She reached Senator Holloway's office through a contact she had at a non-profit legal organization that worked with intelligence whistleblowers, a back channel so removed from anything connected to the Bureau or the DNI that it would have taken weeks to trace even with active surveillance. Holloway's chief of staff called Dana back within 4 hours of receiving the initial message. Within 24 hours Dana was sitting in the back of a private vehicle in a parking structure in Alexandria, Virginia, across from Senator Holloway herself, with the envelope open on the seat between them. Holloway was quiet for a very long time as she read. When she finished she looked at Dana with the steady and somewhat terrifying composure of a person who has spent decades preparing for exactly this kind of moment. She asked 3 questions. She received 3 answers. Then she made 2 phone calls that Dana was not permitted to hear. Things moved fast after that. Faster than Dana had expected even in her most optimistic modeling of the situation. Senator Holloway had spent years building relationships with senior inspectors general at multiple agencies precisely because she understood that the normal channels could not always be trusted. She also had a relationship with a federal judge in the Eastern District of Virginia who had no love for the intelligence community's habit of operating outside judicial oversight, and who, upon reviewing a sealed summary of the evidence, signed a temporary restraining order blocking any destruction or transfer of classified records related to Wraith Protocol within 6 hours of being presented with the request. Harold Vance was placed on administrative leave pending a federal investigation on a Tuesday morning. He was informed by 2 individuals who were decidedly not from his own division, and who arrived at his home before he had left for the office. Catherine Blair was contacted by Senate investigators the same afternoon. Within 48 hours both of them had retained legal counsel and declined to answer questions. Within 72 hours a federal grand jury had been quietly convened. Marcus Cole testified from a secure medical facility, where he was being treated under a federal protection order. He was present in the room via a secure video link for the first session of testimony and in person for the second, walking in on his own 2 feet, dressed in civilian clothes, looking like exactly what he was, a man who had survived something that should have killed him through a combination of preparation, endurance, and one unexpected encounter with an FBI agent and her German Shepherd in an abandoned warehouse on a cold October night. Dana testified for 11 hours across 2 sessions. She answered every question directly, and without qualification. She did not soften anything and she did not amplify anything. She simply told the truth in the precise, detailed, chronological manner that 11 years of federal law enforcement had wired into her as a fundamental operating mode. When she walked out of the final session, the attorney from Senator Holloway's office met her in the hallway and told her she had done something that very few people in her position would have had the courage to do. Dana thanked him and asked where Rex was. He had been waiting in a secured room down the hall. When Dana opened the door, Rex crossed the room in approximately 1.5 seconds and pressed his entire considerable body against her legs and stayed there. The indictments came down 6 weeks later. Harold Vance was charged on 9 counts, including conspiracy to commit espionage, obstruction of justice, and accessory to the deaths of 4 American personnel killed during compromised Wraith Protocol operations. Catherine Blair was charged on 7 counts. 3 additional individuals connected to Axis Meridian Group were charged in a parallel federal action, coordinated with Allied intelligence services in 2 European countries. Dmitry Karev, the Russian contractor in the photograph, was reportedly detained by a European intelligence service, though the details of that action remained classified. The story broke publicly on a Wednesday morning and by Thursday it was everywhere. Congressional hearings were announced. Intelligence oversight reform bills that had stalled for years were suddenly moving through committee. The Director of National Intelligence issued a public statement that satisfied no one. The Bureau issued its own statement expressing full cooperation with the investigation, which also satisfied no one, but was at least in the direction of the truth. Dana Reyes was placed on paid administrative leave, while the internal affairs process ran its course. The process was, by any reasonable measure, a formality given the circumstances. She spent the leave at Tom Greer's property in Northern Virginia, walking the fields with Rex every morning and spending the afternoons reading and answering the letters that had begun arriving at the Bureau's public address after her name appeared in the press accounts of the investigation. There were hundreds of them. Most were from people she would never meet, expressing things she did not know how to fully receive. Gratitude. Relief. The particular kind of emotion that comes from learning that someone you had no reason to believe in chose to do the right thing anyway. Marcus Cole called her on the 41st day of her leave. It was a Sunday afternoon and she was sitting on Tom's back porch with a cup of coffee and Rex's head on her knee. Marcus told her he had been cleared medically and was beginning a new chapter, the details of which he kept appropriately vague. He told her that he had spent 19 years in special operations and had worked alongside a lot of people who were by any definition exceptional. He told her she was better than any of them. Dana told him that was a very high bar, and that she was not sure she cleared it. He told her she had cleared it the night she chose to run instead of call it in. The night she trusted a dying stranger's word over an institution she had spent 11 years building her life inside. There is a particular kind of courage that gets no training manual, no simulation, no rehearsal. It is the courage of the decision made in 3 seconds in a dark building when everything you thought was solid turns out to be built on something rotten. And you have to choose between the structure you know and the truth you just found. Dana Reyes made that choice beside a man she had never met, next to a dog who somehow already knew, in an abandoned warehouse off a Virginia highway on a cold October night. The truth she carried out of that building brought down 2 of the most powerful people in the American intelligence establishment. It triggered the most significant congressional review of covert operations oversight in 20 years. It gave 4 dead soldiers' families answers they had been denied and deserved. And it gave Marcus Cole, who had spent 2 years operating completely alone in the dark, the one thing he had not allowed himself to believe in. It gave him a witness. Dana Reyes returned to active duty on a Monday morning in January. She walked into the building with Rex beside her. She clipped her badge to her belt. She sat down at her desk. And she got to work. Some people break under the weight of the truth. Some people carry it. Dana Reyes was the second kind. And so, it turned out, was Rex. If you love your mom and dad, hit that subscribe button right now and show them some love. This story is for every family that was told to stay quiet, This is for every person who chose the truth anyway. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching this from tonight? Drop your city and state in the comments below. We want to know which part of this great country is watching with us right now.